Marcus Webb, a 34-year-old carpenter, walked home that chilly autumn evening, his boots crunching the dry leaves that lined the narrow dirt path leading to his small cottage. It had been 2 years since Sarah, his wife, tragically died in a train derailment, and since then, the house had felt emptier than ever. The long days at work and quiet nights had become his routine, with nothing but the memories of Sarah to keep him company. As he reached his porch, a strange sight stopped him in his tracks. There, sitting in a wicker basket, was a tiny baby wrapped in an old, warm blanket. The soft cry of the infant tugged at his heart as he bent down to examine the note that rested beside her. "Her name is Lily. Please keep her safe. They're coming," it read. The words sent a chill down his spine. Marcus's mind raced, unsure whether to take the baby inside or immediately call the sheriff. But before he could make a decision, the baby's cry grew louder, breaking his hesitation. He lifted her gently into his arms, cradling her against his chest, and brought her inside. As he lit the oil lamp and settled her in the warmth of the firelight, Marcus's eyes wandered down to the hospital bracelet on the baby's wrist. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the name, Sarah Webb, the same name as his late wife. His mind swirled with questions. How could this be? Sarah had been buried 2 years ago, and yet here was a child with her name on it, as if she had returned from the dead. Could Sarah have been pregnant and kept it a secret from him? He'd never known, and now he was left to grapple with the impossible. Holding the baby, he whispered to himself, "Guess you're my family now." But as he looked at the baby, a realization washed over him. He knew the handwriting on that note. It was Sarah's cursive style, unmistakable. This was no ordinary mystery. Something far deeper was at play, and Marcus had no idea just how much his world was about to change. The morning after, Marcus awoke to the faint sounds of birds chirping outside the small cottage, but he felt anything but rested. His mind was still reeling from the discovery of the baby and the mysterious note. Lily, nestled in a makeshift crib made from an old drawer with blankets, had finally stopped crying and fallen into a peaceful sleep. Marcus, though physically exhausted, found himself unable to rest. His heart was heavy with confusion and disbelief. As the sun crept higher in the sky, a knock on the door broke the silence. It was Mrs. O'Brien, his elderly neighbor, holding a fresh loaf of bread. "Didn't know you had kin visiting," she remarked with a curious look as her eyes landed on the baby in the crib. Marcus, quick to think on his feet, smiled and replied, "My sister's child. Emergency, you know how it is." Mrs. O'Brien seemed satisfied with the explanation, but there was a glint of suspicion in her eyes. "Funny," she said slowly, "she's got your green eyes." Marcus felt a pang of anxiety in his chest, but quickly masked it with a casual chuckle, brushing off her comment. As she left, Marcus shut the door behind her, the weight of her suspicion pressing on his mind. He sat down by the fire, the oil lamp casting long shadows in the dim room. His fingers gently traced the edges of the hospital bracelet still clutched in his hand. He had to know more. The note mentioned the Pine Ridge Sanatorium, and though the name was unfamiliar, the mention of the hospital's location, 50 miles away, stuck with him. What struck him even harder was the fact that the sanatorium had been the site of a tragic fire 2 years ago, around the time Sarah died. Could there be a connection? He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The note warned him not to involve the sheriff, telling him that they were coming. But who were they? He couldn't risk waiting any longer. He packed a small satchel, taking only what he thought might be necessary: baby supplies, a few coins, and his carpentry tools, which he hoped might offer some protection along the way. With Lily wrapped in the warm blanket, he set off toward Pine Ridge. Before leaving, he asked Tommy, a young boy from the neighborhood, to look after his workshop, then went to Old Joe's livery stable to borrow a horse and wagon. As he loaded the wagon, he couldn't help but notice a man standing across the street, watching his house from a distance. The man wore a dark coat, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. But Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as their eyes briefly met. The stranger didn't seem to be in any hurry, and when Marcus turned to look again, the man was gone as quickly as he had appeared. With no time to waste, Marcus set off at midday, leaving the quiet town behind. The roads were narrow and winding, and he took the back roads to avoid drawing attention. His mind was clouded with thoughts of the baby, the mysterious note, and the strange man he'd seen earlier. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but it was hard to ignore the knot of worry that tightened in his chest. He stopped at various farmhouses along the way to ask for milk and water, making sure Lily was comfortable and well cared for, though the journey seemed endless. As the day wore on, he found himself bonding with the baby in ways he hadn't expected. He had no idea how to care for an infant, but every time Lily grabbed his finger or cooed softly, he felt a spark of warmth that pushed away the fear creeping at the edges of his mind. He even sang Sarah's lullaby to her, the words soft and bittersweet. "You're making me a father, whether I'm ready or not," he whispered, a sad smile tugging at his lips. By the time the sun began to set, Marcus had made camp by the side of the road, far from the nearest town. He set up a small fire and wrapped himself in his coat, though the night air was growing cold. He had only a blanket for Lily, and the constant worry gnawed at him. Would he find the answers he was looking for at Pine Ridge? And if Sarah was truly alive, where was she? He barely slept that night, his thoughts a constant swirl of questions, but by morning, he was ready to push on. The next stretch of the journey was more treacherous. The forest around him seemed to close in as he navigated the thick trees, the horse's hooves muffled by the dense underbrush. It was then, on a narrow trail through the woods, that Marcus noticed something strange. A figure on horseback appeared behind him, emerging from the mist of the trees. Marcus's pulse quickened as he recognized the dark coat, the same one he had seen earlier. The man was now riding steadily toward him, his eyes never leaving Marcus's wagon. Fear began to rise in Marcus's chest, and he urged the horse to pick up speed. The man spurred his horse forward, but Marcus wasn't going to wait around to find out who he was. He took a sharp turn, veering onto a different path, hoping to lose the stranger in the dense forest. His heart pounded as the sound of hooves grew distant, and he allowed himself a moment of relief. But as he slowed the horse to a walk and stopped to rest, something caught his eye. Hidden beneath the lining of the wicker basket was a second note, sewn into the fabric. Marcus's hands shook as he carefully pulled it out, unfolding the small piece of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Sarah's. "Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm so sorry. She's yours. Trust Dr. Elena Marsh at the sanatorium. Tell no one else. S." The words seemed to echo in his mind as the world around him blurred. Sarah was alive. She had been alive all this time. How was that possible? What had happened to her? And why had she kept Lily from him? Marcus's heart raced as he realized the danger they were in. If Sarah had been hiding all this time, there were forces out there that would stop at nothing to find her. He had to move quickly. The note was clear. Dr. Elena Marsh could help, but he couldn't trust anyone else. And there was still the question of who they were, the people who had been looking for Sarah, the people who had orchestrated her disappearance. With the second note clutched tightly in his hand, Marcus knew his journey was only beginning. As Marcus neared Pine Ridge, the small town that held more answers than he was ready to face, his mind buzzed with a mixture of fear, hope, and disbelief. The town was far quieter than he had expected, the smoke from a few chimneys curling lazily into the sky as he passed by the half-rebuilt sanatorium. The fire that had ravaged the building 2 years ago still seemed to haunt the area, and the charred remains of the structure were a stark reminder of the tragedy that had occurred here. Marcus's grip on the reins tightened as he maneuvered the wagon through the town's narrow streets. The people he passed didn't seem to notice him, and that only deepened his unease. He had no idea who he could trust here. The second note he had found was still in his pocket, its message echoing in his mind. Trust Dr. Elena Marsh at the sanatorium. But who was this woman? Why did she have such an important role in his wife's disappearance? With Lily still wrapped tightly in the blanket beside him, Marcus felt a surge of determination. He couldn't let this mystery slip through his fingers. He needed answers, and he needed them now. After asking around, Marcus was directed to a small cottage at the edge of town. The place looked nondescript, nestled in the shadow of the mountain range that loomed over the town. But there was something about it that made Marcus's stomach twist. As he approached the door, he hesitated for a moment, but then he knocked. A few moments later, the door creaked open, and a woman in her 50s stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes scanning him as if she already knew who he was. "You must be Marcus Webb," she said, her voice low but steady. "I wondered when you'd show up." Marcus took a step back, startled by her immediate recognition. "How do you know my name?" he asked, his tone defensive. The woman didn't flinch. "Sarah told me you'd come." "I'm Dr. Elena Marsh," she replied, stepping aside to let him in. As soon as Marcus entered the cottage, he could feel the weight of the secrets that filled the air. The place was small but well kept, with an assortment of books on medicine and some older, more worn ones on psychology scattered across the table. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. Dr. Marsh led him to a chair and gestured for him to sit, her eyes flicking over to the baby in his arms. "You're safe here," she said softly, "but they'll be looking for you. I know you have questions, and I'll answer them all, but you need to listen carefully." Marcus sat, his chest tight. "Where's Sarah? What happened to her? Why didn't she come back to me?" The doctor's face softened with sorrow. "Sarah never died in that accident, Marcus. That was the lie they told you." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. "She was taken from you. The train derailment was staged to make everyone believe she was dead. But it wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up." Marcus's eyes widened. "Taken? Why? Who did this?" Dr. Marsh hesitated before speaking again, her voice barely above a whisper. The Pine Ridge Sanatorium was hiding something dangerous. Sarah stumbled upon it by accident, and when she did, they decided she knew too much. They couldn't let her talk. They faked her death to silence her. They couldn't risk anyone finding out about what they were doing there. Marcus felt the room spin. What was she supposed to have found? Dr. Marsh took a deep breath. It was the medical experiments, Marcus. Illegal experiments. They were conducting tests on patients, trying to find ways to manipulate genetics to create so-called perfect people. Sarah saw things she shouldn't have. She was just a visitor, but once they realized she had witnessed something that couldn't be explained, they knew they had to act quickly. Marcus clenched his fists in his lap. The rage that had been simmering inside him was starting to bubble over. How could they do that to her? To anyone? My wife. His voice trailed off as the tears threatened to spill. She didn't deserve this. None of them did. Dr. Marsh's face hardened. "You're right, Marcus. No one deserves to be treated that way." And Sarah wasn't alone. She gave birth to Lily in secret while she was still a prisoner. She was kept in a locked room for months, watched by guards, while Mr. Blackwood, the man in charge of the sanitarium, planned to sell her baby. They were going to put her up for a black market adoption to the highest bidder. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Sarah gave birth there?" he whispered, unable to imagine his wife in such a horrific situation. "She was alone, Marcus. I was the only one who helped her. I tried to care for her as best as I could, but it was dangerous. We were always on the run, always hiding." Dr. Marsh paused, her eyes clouded with regret. 6 months ago, during the fire, Sarah finally managed to escape with Lily. They've been on the run ever since, always one step ahead of the people who would do anything to get them back. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. "Why didn't she come to me?" Dr. Marsh's eyes softened. "She left you a note, Marcus. She couldn't risk leading them straight to you. She didn't want you to get caught in the middle of it. The note was meant to bring you here, to me. We have to stay hidden for now. Marcus stood up abruptly, his mind a whirlwind. Where is she now? I can't just sit here. I need to find her. I need to bring her home. Dr. Marsh put a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. You can't do this alone. The people after you, they're dangerous. You need to be smart. You need to follow the plan. Sarah left me a list of possible places where she could be hiding. The first is an old hunting cabin by Miller's Creek. The second is an abandoned mill outside Rosewood. And the third is the Webb family homestead. Marcus nodded, his jaw set in determination. I'm going to find her, and no one is going to stop me. Dr. Marsh handed him a journal, a small pistol, and a kiss on the forehead for good luck. Take care of yourself, Marcus, and take care of Lily. She's been through too much already. Marcus turned to leave, but just before he stepped out the door, he paused. One more thing. How did you know she was alive? How did you know I'd come? Dr. Marsh smiled faintly. Sarah told me you'd come, and she told me you'd fight for her no matter what. With that, Marcus mounted his horse and headed out into the fading light of the afternoon, his resolve stronger than ever. The journey ahead would be treacherous, but he was ready to face whatever came his way. Sarah had been through hell, but now Marcus was determined to bring her home, no matter the cost. Marcus's journey took him deep into the woods, each mile drawing him farther from the familiar comfort of his cottage and closer to the unknown. The weather had grown colder as the days passed, and by the time he reached the old hunting cabin near Miller's Creek, the sun had already set. The cabin stood in the midst of dense trees, a forgotten relic of a simpler time. Marcus's heart pounded as he approached the door, which hung loosely on its hinges, the faint smell of damp wood filling the air. He cautiously pushed the door open, his eyes scanning the dark interior. The faint glow of moonlight filtered through the cracked windows, casting long shadows across the room. He stepped inside, careful not to make a sound, but as his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he saw signs of recent occupancy. An unlit fire pit, a blanket left hastily thrown aside, and a few scattered belongings. His heart quickened. Had Sarah been here recently? He stepped further into the room, each creak of the floorboards beneath his feet echoing in the silence. He didn't dare light a lamp. Every move he made had to be deliberate and quiet. As he searched the cabin, his eyes caught a piece of fabric wedged beneath a floorboard, its frayed edges unmistakable. It was part of Sarah's dress. His stomach churned, but there was no sign of her, no fresh tracks outside. He knew she had been here, but now she was gone. His mind raced. Could she have escaped again? Were they getting closer? The last thing he wanted was to be caught off guard, especially now that he knew just how dangerous the people searching for her were. The cabin had the feel of a place left in haste, abandoned in a hurry. As Marcus sifted through the room, his hands brushed against something hard. He pulled it out carefully. It was a carving on the wall, hidden behind a loose board. The letters were faint, but Marcus knew them at once. Lakeside R. It was their private code, something only Sarah would write. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the significance. Lakeside. It was the spot of their first anniversary, a place they had once visited together. The thought that Sarah had left him this clue brought a spark of hope in his chest, but it was short-lived. Just then, the sound of horses' hooves echoed from outside, growing louder with each passing second. Marcus's instincts kicked in, and without thinking, he grabbed Lily, who had been sleeping soundly in her basket, and rushed toward the back window. He had no choice but to leave the cabin. If the Pinkertons had found this place, there was no telling how much time he had left before they found him too. He made his way silently through the dense woods, moving with the stealth of a man on a mission, his mind racing with the possibilities of where Sarah could be now. He had to keep moving. As he darted from tree to tree, the noise from the horses faded behind him, but his nerves were still on edge. Every sound in the woods felt like a threat, every shadow a potential danger. After a few miles, Marcus stopped to rest. He was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained from the constant tension, but he couldn't afford to rest for long. Lily's fever had returned, and the worry gnawing at Marcus's heart was unbearable. She needed medical help, and he needed to find Sarah before it was too late. It wasn't long before he stumbled upon a small farmhouse tucked away in the woods. The elderly couple who lived there were kind enough to offer him food, medicine for Lily, and a fresh horse for the journey. He couldn't thank them enough. The warmth of their kindness was a brief but necessary reprieve from the cold and the constant fear. They didn't ask questions, and Marcus didn't offer any explanations. He just needed to keep moving to find the next clue, to find Sarah. With Lily wrapped up in his arms and the new horse tethered to the wagon, he set out again, this time with renewed energy, determined to reach Lake Haven. The journey to the lakeside was long and arduous, but Marcus couldn't afford to let up. It felt like time was running out. With every passing hour, the uncertainty of Sarah's fate pressed harder on him, making his heart ache with a combination of fear and love. He thought of the first anniversary he and Sarah had spent there, the memories they had created in that peaceful spot. It seemed so long ago, yet so close. By the time he reached Lake Haven, it was early morning, and the mist hung heavily over the water, giving the landscape an eerie, almost dreamlike quality. The old boathouse stood at the edge of the lake, half collapsed and worn by the years. Marcus approached cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of Sarah. There was no movement. He called out softly, his voice trembling with hope and fear. "Sarah? It's Marcus. If you're here." But there was no response, only the sound of the wind through the trees. The boathouse seemed empty, abandoned. Marcus stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The smell of decay and damp would fill the air. He moved slowly, careful not to make noise. In the corner, he spotted a makeshift camp, an old bedroll, empty food tins, and a few scattered belongings. It was clear Sarah had been here, but she was gone now. His heart sank. Where could she have gone? As he looked around, he suddenly heard a noise behind him, footsteps on the creaking floorboards. He spun around, his pulse racing, ready for whatever might come next. But the figure standing in the doorway wasn't Sarah. It was Blackwood, the administrator of the sanitarium, flanked by two armed Pinkertons. Marcus froze. Blackwood's cold smile sent a chill down his spine. "Mr. Webb," Blackwood said with a twisted smile, "you've caused us considerable trouble." Marcus's grip tightened on the baby's blanket. He wasn't going down without a fight. He wasn't going to let them take Lily. "The child belongs to the sanitarium," Blackwood continued, his voice calm and methodical. Legal adoption was arranged. Marcus's eyes narrowed, and his voice came out low and determined. "She belongs to her mother. To me." Blackwood's smile faltered, but his eyes remained steely. "Her mother is a fugitive, unstable. She'll be returned to our care." Marcus stepped back, instinctively shielding Lily with his body. Just as the tension in the room reached its peak, the sound of a voice interrupted the standoff. "Step away from them." Marcus turned, his heart leaping in his chest. Standing in the doorway, holding a rifle, was Sarah. She looked gaunt and battered, but there was fire in her eyes. "Sarah?" Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She didn't take her eyes off Blackwood. "I remember everything. Every patient you killed. Every family you deceived." Blackwood sneered. "You have no proof." Sarah's voice was steady, her resolve unwavering. "Dr. Marsh has the records. They're with the federal marshal by now." The standoff was tense, the air thick with the weight of years of suffering. Blackwood's eyes darted to his men, and for a moment, Marcus thought they were all doomed. But just then, the sound of gunfire shattered the silence. The shot didn't come from Blackwood's gun, but from another direction. The Pinkertons froze as the door burst open. Sheriff's deputies and federal marshals flooded the room, led by Dr. Marsh. The Pinkertons dropped their weapons in surrender. Blackwood, caught completely off guard, was arrested on the spot. As Sarah collapsed into Marcus's arms, the weight of the last 2 years seemed to lift. But even as they held each other, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. They had won this battle, but the war for their future was far from done. The chaos at Lake Haven slowly faded as the sound of gunfire was replaced by the crackle of the nearby fire and the shouts of the federal marshals. Marcus held Sarah close, his heart racing as he felt her trembling in his arms. Her skin was cold, her breathing uneven, and when he lifted his hand, it came away slick with blood. Panic flooded through him as he realized the wound was worse than it first appeared. "She's been shot," he cried out, and two deputies rushed to help. Dr. Marsh, who had arrived with the marshals, pushed through the crowd, her face pale but determined. "Lay her down here," she instructed, motioning to a flat area near the wall. Marcus obeyed, placing Sarah gently on the ground, his hand shaking. Lily whimpered in his coat, sensing the tension. "She's losing blood fast," Dr. Marsh said as she examined the wound. "We need to get her to my cottage immediately. She won't survive long without proper care." Marcus nodded, his throat tight with fear, and helped lift Sarah onto a stretcher. The marshals secured Blackwood and the Pinkertons, their faces grim as they realized the depth of the corruption they had uncovered. The journey back to the cottage was slow and painful. Marcus rode beside the wagon, holding Lily close while staring at his wife's motionless form. He had found her, but the thought of losing her again was unbearable. When they reached Dr. Marsh's home, the doctor wasted no time setting up her tools. "You'll need to leave the room," she told Marcus gently, but he shook his head. "I'm not leaving her," he said firmly, voice breaking. "Not again." Dr. Marsh met his eyes for a moment, then nodded. "Then stay out of my way and pray." The next few hours were a blur of movement, whispered instructions, and the metallic scent of blood. Marcus sat by the fireplace, Lily asleep in his arms, staring at the closed door where his wife was fighting for her life. Every minute felt like an eternity. He thought of all the nights he'd spent alone, mourning her death, and now she was here, real and fragile and slipping away again. When the door finally opened, Dr. Marsh stepped out, wiping her hands with a blood-stained cloth. "She's stable for now," she said quietly. "But she's weak, Marcus. Infection has set in, and she'll need days of rest before we know if she'll pull through." Relief washed over him, so heavy that he nearly collapsed. He whispered a prayer of gratitude, his voice trembling. Over the next few days, Marcus barely slept. He sat by Sarah's bedside, holding her hand, feeding Lily when she cried, and doing everything he could to keep his small family together. Mrs. Johnson, the kind woman from the farmhouse, arrived to help care for the baby, bringing warm food and blankets. The days were long and quiet, filled with the soft sounds of Lily's breathing and the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. The world outside seemed to fade away as Marcus focused entirely on his wife and child. Federal marshals came and went, taking statements and evidence from Dr. Marsh. Blackwood's empire had finally crumbled. The doctor's journals, Sarah's testimony, and the surviving record from the sanatorium exposed everything: the illegal experiments, the black market adoptions, and the deaths of countless innocent patients. The sheriff who had worked with Blackwood was also arrested, and Pine Ridge Sanatorium was shut down for good. Justice was finally on their side, though Marcus's heart still felt heavy. He had lost 2 years with Sarah, 2 years of moments they could never get back. On the third morning, when the first light of dawn crept through the window, Sarah stirred. Marcus was half asleep in the chair beside her, but the sound of her voice made him sit upright. "Marcus?" she whispered, weak but clear. He turned to her, tears instantly filling his eyes. "Sarah," he said softly, taking her hand in his. "I'm here." She blinked, disoriented at first. Then her gaze fell on the cradle beside the bed, where Lily slept peacefully. "Is she?" Sarah's voice broke. Marcus smiled through his tears. "She's perfect. She's been waiting for you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she reached out a trembling hand toward the cradle. "I thought I'd never see her again, were you? You'll see us every day now." Marcus promised. "We're not letting go this time." For the first time in years, they simply looked at each other. No words needed. They had both been through hell, but now they were together, and that was enough. Over the following days, Sarah grew stronger. Marcus helped her sit up, fed her soup, and told her everything that had happened. The notes, the chase, the confrontation at the lake. Sarah listened quietly, tears slipping down her cheeks as she held Lily close. "I wanted to come back," she said one evening, her voice shaking. "I dreamed of it every night, but I couldn't. They watched everything. I thought if I led them to you, they'd kill you." Marcus took her hand gently. "You did what you had to do. You kept her safe. You kept both of us alive." Sarah smiled faintly. "I couldn't have done it without Dr. Marsh. She risked everything for me, for us." Their days slowly fell into a rhythm again. Marcus learned how to care for Lily, how to warm milk, how to change her, how to rock her to sleep. Sarah, though still weak, found peace in watching them together. There were moments of laughter too. Marcus's clumsy attempts at singing lullabies, the way Lily would grab his nose and giggle. Sarah would watch them with soft eyes, her heart full for the first time in years. As the weeks passed, Dr. Marsh received a visit from the federal marshal. He brought good news. Blackwood had been found guilty of his crimes and was awaiting sentencing. Sarah's name was cleared, her death certificate revoked, and all records of her being unstable were destroyed. "You're free now," the marshal told her kindly. "You can start again." For the first time since her captivity, Sarah truly smiled. But freedom came with new responsibilities. "The marshal says there'll be a trial," Marcus said one evening as they sat by the fire. "They want you to testify. It could help the other families find justice." Sarah hesitated. "I don't want to relive it all." Marcus took her hand, his thumb brushing over her scarred knuckles. "You won't be alone this time." She nodded, determination replacing fear. "Then I'll do it. For them. For everyone they hurt." The weeks turned to months, and Sarah grew stronger. Lily began to babble and laugh more, filling the cottage with a sound Marcus hadn't realized he'd missed: joy. Dr. Marsh became like family, visiting daily and often staying for dinner. Mrs. Johnson would stop by with fresh bread, and Marcus began fixing furniture for neighbors again, his hands finding peace in work. Slowly, life began to feel normal again. When a marshal returned a month later with new documents, Marcus read them aloud by the fire. "They're giving us a new home," he said, "somewhere safe. A fresh start after the trial." Sarah looked at him, tears in her eyes. "Do you think we can really start over?" Marcus smiled, pulling her close. "We already have." When they finally left the cottage, it was bittersweet. Dr. Marsh hugged them both, tears glistening in her eyes. "You gave me hope again," she said softly. "After everything, I needed that." Sarah kissed her cheek. "You gave us our lives back." As they rode away in the wagon, Marcus glanced back one last time at the small cottage where their broken lives had begun to mend. Ahead lay a new town, a new future, and endless possibilities. As the train carried them away days later, Sarah tensed when they passed the site of the train accident, the one that had supposedly taken her life. Marcus gently took her hand and whispered, "We're past that now. Only forward from here." Sarah leaned against him, Lily asleep in her arms, and for the first time in a long time, she believed it. The pain, the fear, the running, it was all behind them now. What lay ahead was theirs to build, together, as a family that had survived the impossible. It was a quiet morning in their new town when Marcus and Sarah stepped off the train with Lily nestled in Marcus's arms, the fresh start ahead of them still feeling surreal. The town was smaller than where they'd come from, but there was a certain peace in its simplicity. The air was cleaner, the sky clearer, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, Sarah didn't feel like someone was chasing her. They had been provided a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, far from the places where Blackwood's men could track them. It was a small house, but it was their own, a place where they could finally build a life without fear. Marcus, who had once been consumed by his work, found new purpose. He quickly set up a carpentry workshop in the small shed behind their house, and his reputation began to grow. People in town admired the quality of his work, and before long, his small business was thriving. Sarah, who had always been intelligent and resourceful, began helping in the local school. She taught reading to the children, sharing the knowledge she had kept hidden for so long. Watching her in front of classroom, Sarah was no longer the fragile, haunted woman who had once been imprisoned. She was strong again, confident, and at peace. Their life, though still simple, was one of happiness. They spent their evenings together, Sarah preparing meals while Marcus worked in his workshop. Sometimes, they would walk to the lake at sunset, their hands intertwined, as they enjoyed the stillness of their new life. There was laughter, too. Lily's first words, her first steps, the way she would run toward Marcus, her tiny arms outstretched as she said, "Papa." For the first time since their worlds had been torn apart, Marcus and Sarah were able to breathe, knowing that their future was no longer uncertain. Weeks turned into months, and the cycle of everyday life began to settle into a comforting rhythm. Sarah, though still haunted by the memories of her captivity, found solace in the small joys of motherhood. She reveled in the ordinary moments, feeding Lily, rocking her to sleep, and listening to her babble as she played. They made a home out of their little house, planting flowers in the garden that Sarah tended with love. The smell of fresh-cut wood from Marcus's workshop blended with the scent of the roses Sarah had carefully nurtured. It was a simple, beautiful life, a life that had been earned, fought for, and finally found. But even in the quiet of their new town, the shadow of their past remained. The trial was fast approaching, and Sarah's testimony was crucial to the case against Blackwood. Though she had found healing in the comfort of her family, the thought of facing her captor in court filled her with dread. Still, she knew she had to do it. The victims of Blackwood's experiments needed justice, and so did she. Marcus stood by her every step of the way, encouraging her when she doubted herself, reminding her that she was strong enough to face what was ahead. He reassured her that she wouldn't have to do it alone, that they were in this together. And when the day of the trial finally arrived, they traveled to the capital with a sense of resolve. The journey was long, but they knew they had already won so much. As they entered the courtroom, Marcus squeezed Sarah's hand, and she looked up at him, finding comfort in his unwavering presence. The trial was emotionally taxing, as Sarah recounted the horrors of her captivity and the trauma she had endured. She spoke of the illegal experiments, the suffering of the other patients, and the betrayal she felt when she was forced to leave her baby behind. Every word she spoke was raw, but it was a testament to her strength and courage. The defense team tried to discredit her testimony, questioning her memory and her emotional state, but Sarah's voice never faltered. She was determined to make them listen. Her words, though painful, rang with truth, and the jury took just one day to deliberate before returning with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Blackwood was sentenced to life in prison, his reign of terror finally brought to an end. The corrupt sheriff who had helped him was also convicted, and multiple families received closure as the truth of their loved one's suffering was revealed. In the days following the trial, Marcus and Sarah found themselves both relieved and exhausted. They had faced the darkest parts of their past, but now they were free. The trial had ended, and justice had been served. As they made their way back to their new home, they spoke little. They didn't need to. They both understood that their journey wasn't over, but it was different now. They had come through the storm together, and now they could finally rest. A year later, their life in the small town had settled into something stable and beautiful. Marcus's business was flourishing, and Sarah had become an integral part of the local school. Lily was growing quickly, walking and talking, and showing the same spark of life that Sarah had always carried with her. One sunny afternoon, Marcus stood outside his workshop, watching Sarah and Lily play in the garden. The sight filled him with a deep sense of gratitude. He found his family again, and this time, He wasn't letting them go. As Sarah bent down to pick a flower, she looked up and smiled at him. "It's perfect," she said, her voice filled with contentment. Marcus smiled back, his heart swelling with love for her. "It is," he agreed. "Different good." Life had brought them through hell, but they had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more in love than ever. Their bond had been tested in ways most people could never imagine, but in the end, it had proven unbreakable. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over their home, Marcus walked over to Sarah and wrapped his arms around her. Lily toddled over to them, holding out a dandelion in her tiny hand. "Mama, Papa," she said with a smile. Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look of pure joy, knowing that this was their family, whole, healed, and happy. It wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something new. They had found each other again, and nothing could take that away. The love they shared had survived the darkest of times, and now it would light their way forward together.